What the hell am I doing? I'm retired. I shouldn't have to deal with this sort of thing anymore. The hell am I doing in this bunker? Why the hell did I have to sign those papers? Oh yeah, that's right, money. They coerced me here with the promise of over $100,000 bonus just for 1 year's worth of work. Yeah, I know, every man has his number, but, sometimes you just gotta help family, right? Well, here I am, walking through, passing checkpoint after checkpoint and blast door after blast door. What the hell is down here? Godzilla's wife or something? This is crazy. The meeting room. Now maybe I can get some actual answers what the hell's going on. As I sit here, all I can wonder, what the hell did I get myself into this time? As more and more people are brought into the conference room, they're simply led inside and told to sit. No one really knows who each other is. Everyone looks at each other, of course, trying to find any type of familiar face, but finding absolutely none. Eventually, the place is about half full when someone comes in and steps to the front. He simply addresses everyone. Hello, everyone. I'm sure you're wondering why you're here, and you're not at the original posting that you thought you'd be. Well, it's quite simple, really. Each of you has been selected to be part of our elite forces. Everyone looks at each other. Elite forces. Most of us are either too old or too young for that sort of crap. I'm sure you have a lot of questions, and I'll try to answer them for you. And as you should know, that you've all signed NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, before you came in, and there is no way out. If you try to run from here and try to simply run off at the mouth, then you will simply be, detained, hard style. I don't think I have to tell any of you in this room what that truly means. A small hand goes up, as with a confused look on his face. Since you're very young and you're new, it means that you won't make it to the front door. At least not vertically. With that, a young woman reaches out and grabs his hand, seemingly scared of what's going on. And another one next to her, an older woman, simply looks at them, puts her hand on the young girl's shoulder, and simply smiles and nods slightly. Now on to the briefing. The images coming up are going to be from our most recent excursion into the unknown territories. At least that's what we're going to call it for now on. There are many different phrases that you are going to have to get familiar with very, very, very quickly. And as it turns out, we don't have a lot of time. So simply put, most of you grew up hearing about the flying saucers and how aliens were real and Independence Day and aliens and Predator and all that other stuff. Well, you'd be surprised how much of it is real, and that's what you're here for. Flipping on another slide. As you can see, this is what we're going to be facing. They're not very large, as you can see, compared to humans. They're only standing approximately 4 feet tall, completely hairless, and they come in 2 different shades, brown and green. So don't be surprised, though, if when one of these dies, they look gray, as that is what their skin color, their pigment, comes into. As you can see, missing several of the key features of the human face and human body, yet you must understand that each of them is a type of psionic warrior. They do have the ability to mess with your minds. All of you have been brought here for the simple reason that after a little bit of research, we have found that you have the same abilities, just not at the high enough area to fight them directly. Many of those in the room looked around at each other confused. If we weren't able to go toe-to-toe with these things, what the hell were they thinking we could do? That being said, we do know that because you have these abilities, you cannot be taken down as easily as any other human. Which means as soon as you leave here, you're going to be geared up and you are going to be sent to take territory back from them. Territory? Are they serious? Everyone looked at each other confused. Most of us, again, are too old for this sort of crap. Many of us I could see looking around were like clicking their joints or something. Like, this is not right. For those of you concerned that you may or may not be physically able to deal with it, I want you to know that all technologies are at our disposal. Before you go, you will be rejuvenated into a younger version of yourself. Those of you who are young, well, you're just going to go as yourself. Ha ha ha. The joke fell flat. Oh, I guess a tough crowd today. All in all, I'd like you to know that you will be ready to face them. And know that when you go through the machines that rejuvenate you, you will feel your synaptic abilities increase dramatically for some, so do not be surprised if you have to turn and stop as someone is having a bit of a seizure. And now the crowd is nervous. Do not worry, we will have medical staff on call and right next to you the entire time. They will take care of you, and yes, I know you will take care of each other because that is just what you're trained to do. Now, on to the actual mission itself. As you can see, this world here is not too dissimilar to Earth. It is very similar to a mix between deciduous rainforest, or as I should correct that, deciduous forest and rainforest. I'm sorry, deciduous rain is what we usually call it around here. It's just one of the many phrases you're going to have to get used to. Now, you're going to go in there and you are going to take down this facility here. This facility is one of the facilities they use to jump into Earth. And it is also part of the technology that is going to get you back. So you must be able to capture this. Those still looking at it were still confused, looking around, though it was very clear to see those who were combat arms as they were suddenly focused, laser focused on what they were seeing and what they were hearing. They needed all the intel they could get. One hand raised. Yes, you have a question? Yeah, sure do. You want to tell us what type of weapons we're going to be having? Because I have a feeling that whatever these guys do, standard ballistics just ain't going to be working. You are correct on that. You will be using a type of electromagnetic cannon. We do call it a cannon, but it is scaled down dramatically to be about the size of your M16 rifles. Maybe a bit larger for the heavy weapons to the size of an M14 rifle. But they do work. They do work very well against their devices. Everything they have is electromagnetically powered, which means if you strike it, you have a good chance of knocking the engine out of commission. If it is a flying aircraft, do not be surprised if it suddenly drops towards the planet's surface. Any other questions before we continue? Actually, no, wait. I do have a bit of things to go through, and we need to go. The time is of the essence. A few of those combat arms guys realized what was happening and turned slightly, and realized there was another one to the back. A woman in a strange-looking lab coat simply tapping on her wrist, signaling that time is running low. The briefing continued, simply showing the area, giving them a map, and showing them a few different points of the gear. It was pretty simple and straightforward as far as humans go. A direct fire weapon, along with several ballistic explosives, mainly a sort of grenade. Also, different types of grenade using superheated plasma, which a lot of people joked is coming straight from a video game, and also a couple electromagnetic grenades. They were warned, even though this simply shoots out electromagnetic, treat it as a normal grenade and don't let it go off anywhere near you. Everyone took that one to heart. As they finished up the briefing, it was off to the holding area. From there, everyone was stripped down and had to be paraded basically naked, one right after the other, into individual pods. Once inside these pods, they didn't feel anything. Many of them complained that it wasn't working, and then they felt the strange, fuzzy sensation, almost as though every cell suddenly grew fur and was shaking on the inside. It was an odd sensation for most. Some just sat there, closed their eyes, and just waited for it to pass. Others started to panic, yet eventually each of the pods would begin to open one by one. As they walked out, They were shown themselves by the medical staff. They brought in mirrors so they could see what was going on. Several oh shits and fuck me's came out, and these were justified, of course, especially since one of the women looked at me. Fuck me, I'm hot again, as she began to caress different parts of her body. Holy shit, I thought these were going to be down by my knees, as she held her chest. This made a few folks laugh. A few other guys looked and started moving around their joints. Joints that had been giving them problems were now fixed. They looked over one of the men who had been missing part of his fingers. Yes, 3 of his fingers were gone, but now they were back, and he was simply trying to move them, getting his body to move them correctly, and he seemed to be having some difficulty, along with one of the men whose bottom half of his leg had grown back. He was having a lot of trouble walking. Everyone was reassured that they would eventually get used to their new appendages if they grew them within about an hour, which is about how long it took. Yet, it still took a few people to hold the man up who was having a lot of trouble walking on his new leg. As they continued down, they could see that a few came out looking at different scars. One man even said, "Wow, no body hair, that's kind of cool." This confused the medics as they asked, "What do you mean?" "Well, I didn't have body, I was a furry guy. Didn't you see me when I went in? I looked like a chia pet. I mean, seriously, you could mistake me for wearing a jacket out here. And now, look, I'm hairless and I'm thin again. This is nice." For a moment, they contemplated putting him back in the pod, and he simply said, "You're not big enough, and there ain't enough of you to make that happen." Could tell this man was combat arms. The look on his eyes simply stated, "Back off, or else." Then it was on to the next room, where most of them simply went in and showered. It was just to clean off any extra sweat, as the hypermetabolism of the pod causes everyone to kind of, stink. It was a very quick process. Of course, it doesn't take long to shower. Soak, rinse, soap up, rinse again, you're done. And it was there. A few had to go and get their hair trimmed, as for some reason the hair on their head had grown much, much farther. One poor guy actually had to have his eyebrows trimmed, as they suddenly had enough hair that they went down the sides of his face. He laughed about this and originally was moving them around left and right just to kind of joke with everyone to lighten the mood, which was very, very appreciated. Eventually, they were able to go into each of the lockers. The lockers were marked by each individual person and also a different code number. In particular, there was one that had L. Jones. The man walked up. Sure enough, everything was in his size, and also had his preference on weapons stored inside. But next to L. Jones was Bravo Lima 129er X-Ray 254. He didn't know what these numbers were for, nor did he care. He wasn't told to memorize it, so he didn't really care at all. Another one looked up, and it was just numbers, and he had to grin and laugh a little bit. One next to the man asked, "Why, what's so funny?" He goes, "That's just my DOD ID number." "Your what?" I was in the service. It's the number I had to memorize because we couldn't use our social security numbers anymore. The young one next to him, "Oh. Why does mine have letters in it?" "I don't know. Ask those guys. You think I know any more than you at this point?" With that, they all seemed to get dressed. The sort of embarrassment of walking around naked, mixed with male and female, seemed to fade very quickly, and eventually they all got geared up. It was clear that some were set more for heavy weapons, others for medical technology, and others for communications. It was odd, but totally acceptable and understandable to have this type of mix. As they were escorted out, they realized that something was a little miss. There was no ammo. Inside all the pouches was nothing. There was no grenades, there was no magazines, there was no nothing. They looked at the weapons and wondered what in the hell was going on. but that was simply the next room. As they went in, they went again to their individual names put up on the side of the wall, and in front of them was all the ammo that they would need. But this was very simply not enough, especially since they realized that they were using a type of electromagnetic weapon to fire projectile weapons along with some sort of energy pulse at the same time. The weapons themselves all had dual barrels. At first, it looks as though they were using some sort of gas-operated or piston-operated system, but that was not the case, as they could see, if you look close, the gas tube was not there. There was no tube. Just a second area that had some sort of antennae, a focused antenna. Anybody who's worked with comms recognized it almost immediately. The magazines that were given to them were not your standard bullets, but instead simple tungsten rods, most of them with the same diameter, that is 7.62, yet were stretched about 3.5 inches long, kind of like giant nails. It was odd to most, but those, once they got the answer on why, and it was explained that these weapons used, well, electricity. They're basically coil guns. And as soon as that was said, more than half of those in attendance realized how effective these were going to be, at least ballistic-wise. They didn't understand what the electromagnetic portion was going to do. They were informed that inside the hilt of each of the weapons was the power source itself, and no, the power source couldn't run out. It was a micro zero-point generator. This made a few of them actually lift their weapons up and put their ear next to the buttstock, as though they were thinking they were going to hear the engine humming. A few of them simply turned and said, "You don't know your physics, do you? That thing's not going to make noise." Everyone kind of looked at each other and was, okay, whatever. However, there was an area of contention. It was very soon that it was clear those that had been in combat arms started asking for more ammo, more than what they were required to wear. They started demanding more pouches and more ammo. It was very quickly brought to them. Along with that, more grenades, especially the electromagnetic ones. If the species they're going against uses that much, they're going to need as many as possible. And after gearing up, everyone headed to the next room, and that is when people got scared. Inside the next room, which was massive, was an area that was seemingly boxed off by 4 different columns. Looking close, a few people whispered, "Tesla coils." It was then clear to anybody who had done even a modicum of research that when the man said that they had access to technology that would blow their mind or was beyond anything they expected, they weren't kidding. However, a quantum flux field was something that most people understood. And if you don't, well, I suggest you look into it. All in all, only a few of them were not hesitant to get in between any of those pillars. The pillars did seem to have a sign of some sort of twisting noise in them. It was strange. It wasn't really spinning, but you could see that everything was wrapped helically, almost as though it coiled up towards the top. This was on the outside, and this made a few people laugh. Those that seemed to know their basic physics were simply trying to explain things, dulled it down, of course, as much as possible, to those that had no idea what the hell was going on. This seemed to allow the engineers to go and do what they had to do without having to explain everything. And before they knew it, everyone was getting ready. They stood outside of where the pillars were, and the machine turned on. It was almost like any other light switch going on. And right in front of their eyes, it seemed as though a 3-dimensional image of the planet they were going to was simply projected up. But this was no projection. This was an actual portal doorway. The engineers yelled forward, "Make sure you run through, and when you come back, make sure you run back." Everyone kind of looked at them, and then they simply said, "Trust me, you don't want to go slow." Whatever. With that, a few of the clearly combat arms guys got ready side by side and ran through the portal. As they did, there was barely a blip as they went through. It wasn't like those goofy science fiction shows where everything kind of waves like water. No, they simply seemed to go through it like any other doorway. The only very shudder was that of the sudden change in wind on either side. This was odd to everyone until they saw the two on the other side simply turn, raise their weapons up, clear the area, then turn around and wave everybody forward. And with that, everyone got up to about a jogging pace and went through. Not a problem. As they left, suddenly the door shut behind them. It was gone. And there was no other type of machine that's going to get them back. They all thought for a second, and a few folks said, well, we've been left here to die. This was not the case, though, as they had been briefed that all they had to do was hit the signal on the commo system that they had, and the door would open back up. At least, they hoped it would. As they moved, a few people wondered how in the hell they were going to get a radio signal from a planet in the middle of the ass end of nowhere all the way to Earth. One of the men spoke up, said, well, either we're still on Earth or they're using tachyons. The hell's a tachyon? Just think of it faster than light radio waves. Okay. I thought that was a science fiction thing. No, that's when science fiction actually uses real terms. With that, another one of the men up front went, shh, follow us. And with that, those who clearly had combat experience took point, got into a wedge formation, and continued forward. They followed the map, taking almost a direct straight line as they went, only turning when they had to get around some sort of obstacle, or if they thought they saw some sort of creature moving about. With that, they tried to hold fire as best they could as they finally got to their area. Surprisingly, they didn't get assaulted by any large animals when they were there, though there were insects. They simply moved around or swatted them away. And then they saw the facility. They looked close, pulling up a simple set of binoculars to see what was going on. A plan was made that they would come in from two separate directions, and they would rush in as fast as they could. Another group would stay behind to offer some sort of cover. If things go bad, it was their cover to get the hell out. As they moved forward, they got into position. Once into position, a signal was given, holding up a hand, 3, 2, 1, and with a motion with the knife hand going forward, everybody rushed at the same time. They only had to clear about 70 meters of open space before they got there. But as they did, they realized something was wrong. There's nothing happening. They didn't see any of the aliens, any of the enemy, any of the anything. What the hell were they doing? Eventually, they got to what they seemed to be a door. Swiping their hand in front of it, they heard, Well, they weren't getting in that way. So they had one choice. They grabbed a couple of grenades, taped them together, put them against the door, and then pulled the pin and backed away. With a mighty kaboom, the door blew open. Just enough where they could get their hands inside and force it the rest of the way, at least until they saw a part of the door that was bent. Inside, they immediately rushed in, following the map straight to the control area. And as soon as they got to the control area, they seemed surprised. Because inside were humans. Lots of humans. But the humans seemed to be in pods, stasis pods. As those up front began to clear the area, looking around for anything that they might use, anything that'll tell them anything about what was going on. They began to check the pods, and then they realized something. Those in the pods were wearing the same uniforms they had. Had they been tricked? Were these ones caught? Was this an actual retrieval that they didn't know about? They began to check the pods. Seemingly, there was no seam to these pods. It was strange. They were all partially transparent. and yet they looked around, felt for anything that's going to get them open. Eventually, one of those inside simply said, "Fuck this," grabbed his knife and slashed into it. There was no liquid as he thought would come out, but instead the hiss of air. And then suddenly, the pod itself opened from the bottom and peeled back like 7 different pieces of a banana peel, opening up, and the body simply hung there for a moment. He reached up, grabbed the young man who was there by his gear, pulled him forward, and once out of what seemed to be some sort of gravimetric hold it had, the body slumped forward, and the man suddenly came back to his senses. Where the fuck? Who the fuck? How the, what the, He was out of it. He was very out of it. At that point, we realized something was off, some sort of release valve. Something happened. Eventually, we realized we didn't have to stab the things. We just had to reach down to the bottom, grab a hold of it, and basically stick our finger in it. And it popped open like a flower. It was strange, funny, and really, really gross. Eventually, a few of the engineers had got over towards the control panel and realized what the hell was going on. They couldn't read what was going on, but they used a few pieces of their equipment to try and download what they could. Those that weren't busy were taking video all the way around, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Eventually, we heard beeping coming from the console. We didn't know as this strange yellow light was flashing. We didn't know if this was a warning or this was simply saying, "Hey, your friendlies are around." And we didn't want to find out. We had something we could take back. Something we could. And eventually, we would start heading out. As they headed back down the hallway, a few of them noticed that the hall itself was seamless. Absolutely seamless. It was strange. It wasn't organic. It was still metal, but it was strange. They ran their hands around it, and a few folks tried to get a sample, but their knives just wouldn't pierce through it. It was strange. They couldn't figure out what the hell was going on, but they didn't want to stick around and find out. As they bolted out the door, they ran towards the trees, holding the newly recovered personnel in their hands as they tried to get back as soon as possible. And with that, a burst came out. A strange burst of power came back to the point where they didn't know what the hell was going on. It wasn't an explosion per se. It wasn't exactly air. They couldn't figure out what was going on, but the side of their bodies that were facing that way were tingling again. This could not be good. With that, they saw a strange craft lifting up. A strange triangular craft seemed to be rising up from another building. Oh crap, we've been made. With that, everyone turned their weapons up, and all of a sudden a few of them just yelled, "Fire! Shoot the son of a..." And they fired as fast as they could, as many times as possible. They could hear their weapons pinging off the side, but suddenly the triangular ship turned slightly, and then it seemed to wobble more and more and more. Then another one of the soldiers yelled, "EM grenades! Use them! Use them!" And with that, he pulled one out of his pouch, pulled the pin, threw it as far as he could, getting as close to this device as possible, and then they all bolted as soon as they ran. As soon as the EM grenades burst in a strange halo of light, the craft itself wobbled more and then simply dropped and flat landed on the ground. What the hell was going on? What the hell is that? Nobody had been briefed on this. They didn't expect to even see anything outside their own little ETs, but they weren't going to stick around. They ran as fast as they could back to the start position, simply hit the receiver and hoping that somebody on the other end would have it on their transponder. Several others started hitting their buttons as well, and a few moments later, the doorway opened up, and they all rushed across as fast as possible. Only 2 stayed behind to wave everyone through, and as they looked up, they could see what seemed like small bipeds coming up. They didn't seem to have weapons. It was strange. They seemed to simply be observing, as though they didn't have a care. They didn't give a shit what the humans were actually doing, because the humans wanted to get the hell out of there. A few moments later, the last 2 realized that was the last of everybody, and they jumped through the portal as well. As the portal shut instantaneously, they all looked around and immediately realized they were surrounded by their own guards. They were all led back to another area where they all had to disrobe and go through a cleansing shower, just in case some sort of strange bacterial virus came in. And then it was off to be debriefed once they were all given fresh clothes. There, they were given the same person to be talked to. That man simply asked, "So, that was a good mission. Does anyone have any questions?" One of the soldiers raised his hand. "Yes." He stood up. "So, you didn't brief us well on this at all. So, next mission, you're going to have to give us 100% debriefing. Everything. What's going on down here and what's going on out there. Because all I can tell is you sent us to war with an alien group who seemed to be so nonchalant that we were actually firing at them. It makes me ask one question. If this is some sort of secret war, we all should know if we're winning or losing."